a colleague from Prague, the Czech Republic, Dr. Karel Balcar, will be speaking to us today on the matter of conscience. He has been trained in a variety of different settings, including under Raymond Cattell at the University of Illinois, as well as at Charles University, where he now teaches. I promised him that I wouldn't take too much time of him, so I'm going to allow him to proceed and ask you to welcome him with me.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for introduction. Oh, this will work. Okay, it seems to. Now, actually, I'm not going to talk as much about conscience, what's to say about it, but about some attempts to explain conscience, the phenomena of conscience. We all know what it means. We all know how we sometimes feel we should or shouldn't plan to do something, or be doing something, or have done something. And we also know the distinction to do something or not to do something because it harms us in some material or social way, and to do or not to do something because it just is right to do, or is not right, is wrong to do, or to have done, and so on. So we know the phenomenon of conscience is quite well known. But as always, modern deterministic science and psychology, the traditional modern psychology, is attempting at being a deterministic science modeled after, let's say, physics, is not happy about introducing the elements of freedom, personal responsibility, and such weird concepts that are connected with the notion of conscience. First, I would like just to remind you, because you know it all, about the room, the ground, where we'll be working just now. And this is the existential image of man. I come from Europe, so this is made after Viktor Frankl. Well, the concepts, the names that are put there, these are mine, not Frankl's, and these are not definitions. These are just markers. Frankl says we can best conceive of man as living in, I would say at least, 3 dimensions. There are 3 qualities to human life. The somatic one we are well acquainted with, where we may say the value to which our somatic life is directed is, let's say, health. Let's say health, survival, and progress. As far as psychological, experiential quality of of life is concerned, we might very roughly summarize what's the goal, what's the direction, with a traditional expression, happiness. You know, we wish you health and happiness. And what helps people to be happy? Maybe two things, two markers. Pleasure, to feel well, and power, to be able to. And the third one, existential, or for me this is synonymous with noetic. There we see operating this meaning motivation, will to meaning. And for me, the markers I have chosen for the life in this dimension is the notion of conscience and will. Will is a capacity that is usually analyzed in the frame of reference of psychology. I tried it too when writing a textbook on personality psychology, but I found what other psychologists did too. It's very difficult to fit the phenomenon of will into the deterministic frame of reference in psychology, personality. And I would say more properly, the phenomenon of a human will belongs to the existential or noetic dimension. Now, all together can make a person to prosper and to achieve somatically, psychologically, existentially. Now, this is what we know, and this is where I'm going to talk about these psychological attempts to explain the phenomenon of conscience. The leading motivation after Viktor Frankl of human existence is to fill one's actions, experiences, and attitudes with meaning. Generally, they become meaningful when the highest possible value contained in the present situation is realized, actualized. The values are present in the form of opportunities to do something which is good, which we recognize as good, and to actualize the best thing possible. This means to make my action meaningful. Nevertheless, what's meaningful for me in this situation might not be meaningful for you. I want to just remind you that the meaning is individual, pertinent to the situation, to the concrete situation, and to the concrete person. However, behind these many opportunities to act meaningfully for a person in his or her situation, there is something more. We may discover, we may feel some common principles behind the valuable opportunities how to act in a situation. We might discover some universally shared foci of meaning, and we may call them general life values. These general life values indicate directions in which our concrete attempts at fulfilling the meaning of the situation are directed, where they converge. Now, having concrete opportunities, what's your opportunity now? You're sitting here, listening to me, giving a paper. What's the best, the highest possible value that you can just now realize? It depends. Depends upon me, my presentation, depends upon you. For some, it might be just stay here and listen. Maybe I'll tell you something of importance. For others, the best possible thing, the most meaningful thing is just to get out of here and find yourself something more valuable for you just now. I don't suggest it, but for some, if you are really tired and you have a really long way before you, the most meaningful might be just to go and take a nap. Why not? Okay. But, I repeat, behind these unique opportunities to fulfill the concrete value possibilities in the situation, there are some very general value orientations in our life. But the question is, how do we know? How do we know that this is valuable, this should be, this is right or good for me and for others in the situation, and this is wrong, this shouldn't be? And even in many situations, we don't have only one single opportunity to do something, let's say, reasonable, or happy, or healthy, or good in general, but we can have more of them. So how do we know what is better, what is the best? And no, the answer is a very speculative one, is we do have something, there is a voice, there is an organ, an indicator, who tells us this is good, but this is better. And this is wrong, this is worse, worst of all. And this is called traditionally conscience. So, in this respect, the existential analysis gives this answer that is concurrent with that of many thinkers. Let me say, for instance, including Socrates. Socrates, as we read in Plato's Apology, referred to a sort of voice which comes to me and always dissuades me from what I'm proposing to do. And, or the other, Paul from Tarsus, for instance, in his letter to Romans, he refers to an inner instance, and now quote, bearing witness to Gentiles for doing by nature the things required by law, and thus causing their thoughts to accuse or to defend them. The general idea throughout the history is that every man and woman is assumed to have a special and just this task fulfilling noetic instance, which is conscience. Viktor Frankl characterizes the nature of conscience using a perspicacious analogy. In the somatic and psychic realm, man has his sense organs, sight, hearing, so on. These sense organs serve us to to recognize the physical and experiential nature of various objects of perception. Similarly, says Frankl, in the noetic existential dimension, there serves to him in recognizing the existential nature and value of various opportunities to act, to relate, to take an attitude. So to recognize the existential nature and value of these opportunities, also a special, Frankl says, organ of sense. This means organ of meaning, and this is his conscience. Now, let's just pick these metaphors of voice, as in Socrates, witness, as with Paul from Tarsus, and that of an organ of meaning. Let's proceed in examining first the nature and trustworthiness of the experienced operation of conscience, and then the nature of psychologists' attempts to explain it through reducing conscience to some known psychological processes. It may be useful to note that today's sciences, including psychology, as I mentioned already, have in their anthropological assumptions about the nature of man no conceptual means for handling moral values or conscience in terms of their objective validity. The fully deterministic model of man in modern psychology still excludes any possibility of conscience. It's, well, let me say, tongue in cheek, scientifically impossible. Why? We are predetermined beings. Everything we do, feel, think is just a natural, necessary result, consequence of preceding causes. We are not free. Freedom just is something that disturbs today's traditional science, including psychology. Therefore, we are not responsible. Therefore, if we have something that acts like conscience does, if we have this phenomenon which is real, this must be an illusion. Maybe a necessary illusion. Maybe an illusion necessary for our survival, biological survival, psychological survival, but must be illusion, and as such, as an element in the chain of psychological events, illusions are also psychological events, can be studied and explained naturally. Well, what psychological science is telling us generally is that we shouldn't take seriously all that business with values, conscience, meaning of life. Yes, phenomenologically, this is our true experience. But basically, this is something else. And this something else, this might also sound quite familiar to you from Viktor Frankl's writings. To say that something is nothing but something else is the so-called reductionism. Reductionism means, in Frankel's and in a very general meaning, that events happening in 1, 2, 3, or even more dimensions are as if projected onto one or a lesser number of dimensions. So, saying, as it used to be with the materialistic psychology, that our feelings, thoughts, ideas are nothing but the function of our cortex, some physiological, neurophysiological function. This is biological or physiological reduction. And to say that our conscience is nothing but a psychological mechanism, a link in the chain of causally related psychological events, experiences, also an attempt at reduction. Now, we do not know. We should explore whether this attempt at reducing conscience and existential phenomena as such to only nothing but psychological processes, developmental, functional, and so on, itself will function or not. Now, this objection is not to be taken lightly. When we talk about freedom, responsibility, conscience, what we usually appeal to is common sense experience. And the common sense and the common experience show us also that people err a lot. The people are mistaken. They are wrong. They suffer from illusions and delusions and self-delusions, self-deceptions. So, how do we know whether what we just, let me say it in quotes, hear this tiny, sometimes very tiny voice of consciousness, whether it is a true witness to the true of right and wrong, or whether this is just such an illusion. Now, I would like, I prefer to think about it for now as about personality. Now, we don't have only psychological, genuine psychological theories, but we also have theories of different dimensions that have their projections onto the plane of psychological studies. Like from biology, biopsychological directions, approaches, stress that also psychology is basically determined by homeostatic processes, somatic processes serving homeostasis and growth. And psychoanalysis, dynamic psychology, it's known of Freud as superego. In verse, gestalt therapy, psychological theory, he speaks about introjects. It's very similar. There is in the child's development, person's development, someone or few people that assume the position of authority. These are parents, which is natural authority to the child. These may be other key persons in the person's life. And from them, especially in childhood, the child hears or feels and learns. You mustn't do that, or you must do that. This gets internalized, this voice from outside, because inside voice telling the child and then grown-up person, this is not right to do, or not right to think, or even not right to feel. So we have guilt and shame if you do that, or if you do what we will command, we may feel pride, sadness, yes, good boy, good girl. Now this is one explanation. Conscience is nothing but the voice of parents, voice of important others. Now, what follows? The conscience is nothing but the voice of other people, maybe most important. But it's a message that could have been twisted in some ways due to child's limited capacities to understand or orient itself. What can we do? Well, it's a psychological phenomenon. It's caused in some way. And if this phenomenon bugs the person, if this conscience bugs the person, we speak of a cruel conscience. Cruel conscience. So there is a failure. We may, as the gestalt therapy is done, just invoke the introjects, asking the person what the person says. I cannot do that. It's wrong. And we ask, okay, think for a while. Who in your life? Which person in your life? Who have said this to you? Okay, you were, and somebody, wow, this might be my father, my uncle, or my grandmother. I like her very much. This is her voice. And now the therapeutic work continues just to lead the person to separate what's mine and what's my grandmother's, father's voice, and so get in inverted roles healed from his or her cruel consciousness. The other example is from the behavioristic approaches. It's simple. It might be called conditional reflex or anticipatory response. What happens is simply something, and in connection with that, you experience something very unpleasant, which is called punishment in the learning theory, or something pleasant, which is called in the behavioral theory, learning theory, reward. Okay. This might be repeated, or it might be only once. Then you do that again. Nothing happens. But you already react by feelings, or with feelings, that are typical for our common sense conscience. You feel guilty as if expecting punishment, or you feel satisfied as if expecting reward. So this is a very simple picture of conscience. And what should we do about guilt feelings? Well, feelings of satisfaction do not bother me much. But what about guilt? Again, because this is a learned, conditioned reaction, we can simply uncondition. We may go for extinction theory. Okay, no problem with values, no problem with existence, no problem. Let's see. Other examples. Well, as far as humanistic psychology is concerned, they are not as fast as to explain away the phenomenon of conscience as a simple, mechanical, psychological effect. But there are also some explanations. In some approaches, there is a deterministic psychological understanding of the phenomenon of conscience proposed as we experience presence or lack of of congruence or incongruence of the human self with either the natural tendencies of organism as a process or as incongruence between the interiorized conditional acceptance of one's awareness, which leads to generalize self-non-acceptance. Well, as far as we see that what is the perceived self and prescribed self expected from us, that's we are like that. That's okay. We can have good conscience. There, where it's different, there is guilt. Either there is something in us which is not prescribed, something wrong with us, and we feel guilty for the sin of commission. Or there is something expected from us which we do not measure up. We lack the sin of commission, and is also psychological explanation. Can we help when we suffer from uncertainties, existential uncertainties, guilt feelings, unhappiness about ourselves? Yes. For instance, the therapist shows to the patient unconditional acceptance. Again and again and again, and in this way teaches the patient to accept himself or herself as a therapist, and so to reorganize this conflicting self, just self as I am, real self, self as I should be understood. So this also may be treated. And to mention cognitive psychology, one of these candidates, a very interesting one, is the theory of cognitive dissonance. Where does conscience fit in? Oh, we say, Christine says, that there are very few situations where you got 100% reasons to do something, or, on the other hand, 100% reasons not to do it. Now, most of situations are in between. There is some more reasons for you not to do it than reasons to do it, or vice versa, opposite. Now, I must absolutely be sure in whatever I do. So in therapy you learn you need not. So you need not to make up additional reasons using this special defense mechanism of rationalization called conscience. No. This is something I wanted to present as a tenet of deterministic psychology, which is unable to cope with freedom, choice, values, and morality. Unfortunately. But it's not that simple to say these psychological explanations are wrong. It's not true. They are true. There is enough empirical evidence, clinical evidence, experimental evidence, that show something, but I showed it in a much better way than I wanted to. What I wanted to show is that unless we handle real material objects to which we may point and say, this is a chair, we have to use metaphors. We cannot otherwise. So I am using a metaphor here too, that there are two kinds of mechanisms. I'm not going to speak about the selfish gene. This is also an interesting hypothesis about conscience, but it has such a conceptual and logical flaws that I don't think it's worth of speaking about. That these psychological mechanisms, yes, we feel our consciousness is telling us this or that, but they actually only mirror our own needs, own emotions, ideas. Whereas the true conscience is a sort of a window to the world of values. Remember, in Frankl's conception, in Frankl's existential analysis, the values are objective, and they are there. They are in the world. They are not within ourselves as such. We self-transcend to them in recognizing them, in realizing them. So this, the values that are reflected in the psychological mechanisms posing as existential conscience are actually self-values, motives, needs, fears, experiences, and so on. Whereas the true conscience shows us something about the world where there is objective right and wrong. Now, this is a philosophical question. I don't know whether you believe there is an objective, something objective about rightness and wrongness, about good and evil. But in case there is, then we don't have to rely upon what is good or bad or evil just for us individually, for our self-preservation, self-actualization, self-realization. The true conscience will show us what's good for its own sake, what's good for the world, for me too. But I am not in the center. In the center is something else, the world of values. Now, I got to finish. Time is over. And there are many things we could say about it. Maybe you can come with something, question, suggestion. I am not able to give you the precise measuring instrument, how to discern the voice of conscience substitutes or surrogates, which are psychological mechanisms put forth by psychological theories, and if there is such a thing, of the true voice, of the genuine voice of conscience, organ of meaning, or witness to the truth. But it seems, again, using common sense, common experience, with ourselves at the moments of humility and our patience, then where we can tell the difference. Now, the next task would be to try to find out how different it does feel when you are acting, or patients are acting out from psychological mechanisms and from the genuine conscience. But that's about all I have to say for tonight. Thank you for coming. Okay, now I was told that we don't have to empty the room now, so please, whoever feels so, have your coffee or whatever you want, and if some of you will just go on with questions or comments upon that, I am ready, I'm here.